Lightweight, portable, innovative. TESCO's 6330 meter site analyzer is the most versatile and complete tool for testing the entire functionality of transformer-rated metering installations. Contact us today for a free demo.
So hello, everybody. My name is Paul Fratellone. I'm Director of Software Products for TESCO Software. Thank you for taking time out of your day, and we're going to get started now to talk about asset management and AMI readiness. So, asset management, although it's not as exciting as a lot of other topics in IT, but it is a very complex to any organization that wants to balance its risk, performance, and costs of all its assets. One of the biggest problems I've seen across the industry is a lot of outdated technology, a lot of silos that have been existing throughout the decades in utilities. And the world that we live in today is fundamentally different, where information is being shared, and not only shared it's being shared in real time. And as we know, our customers are very engaged in knowing more about their own utilization, knowing more about where the company's going, its green initiatives. So our customers are fundamentally different. The operating environment, as you heard Tom say previously, that it is undergoing massive changes. There is a published standard by the ISO for asset management. It's ISO 55000 that was published back in 2014, and there was another version upgrade made in 2018. It's a very short ISO standard. I suggest everybody take a look at it. But what it's all about is why asset management is important to organizations, why there needs to be an alignment of how assets are being looked at, tracked, and it's going to enable and bridge the gaps between the goals of financial and non-financial functions. And as we know, different assets are treated differently. Different assets have different monetary value, and the meter, even with AMI, is still the cash register of the company. And by having a common view, approach, strategy to asset management, it's going to improve your knowledge sharing, your decision-making process, and an understanding of what are the common goals and framework that we need to operate under. And it's going to allow you to realize your investment in the various assets and track performance, track costs. What's going to come out of an aligned asset management approach is you're going to be able to efficiently measure assets and organizational performance, demonstrate your achievement of those objectives, improved internal controls, more transparency, complete reporting, and a better understanding of risk and how do we manage risk. So, as most of you know, I actually didn't look into the chat, but if you could, let us know where you are in your AMI deployment, whether you have not started, whether you've started, or whether you're complete. And for those who've been through the last, who have completed their deployment, these are some of the targets, these business case drivers that I have seen across several utilities that have gone AMI. One of the key is efficiency and flexibility and reliability. And those three are becoming very important to all our customers. So some of the enablers for you to get started when you're thinking about when we're going AMI is having a very clear change management approach and strategy, not only internal, but also external. And those of you who went from the legacy to the AMR and now to AMI, I think you can pull on those experiences and look back at how the project was organized making sure that there is adequate and ample resources and staffing for this project, which is going to be a major endeavor. And I've seen companies that have actually had projects for the AMI rollout being their own specific jobs, that employees were transferred over to this project and their regular production, their day job, was no longer their responsibility. Those that did that had a higher level of success. Those that share the production work that they have to do plus the project suffered, had missed deliverables, had poor quality. So my statement here is to make sure as much as possible that you staff the project for the AMI rollout. So that is their main job. That is their main focus. And there's going to be a lot of people that are going to be anxious about the AMI rollout. And I'm almost sure that same feeling was there when AMR rolled out, where you didn't need the massive meter readers. You had someone drive by in a car and pick up those readings. And now with AMI, there is no bodies involved, unless you have opt-out people, of course. But the information is going to flow. People need to know where they stand, where they're going to be going, how is it going to affect them. And that's internally, but the same approach and communication and transparency needs to be done for your external customers. And as you guys know, there's a lot of material out there today about how the AMI is bad, it causes cancer, and there's a lot of press out there that is against AMI rollouts. These have to be addressed. These have to be mitigated. Your customers need to know. They're going to want to know why. What's the benefit? And if you remember the previous slide, those are some of the goals and targets that you need to communicate to your external as well as your internal staff people. Any questions so far? So some of the cost reduction benefits, and these are just examples, like I said, your meter reading is going to go from a manual to automated. Your field services activity to turn on or off no longer requires someone to be physically there. You're going to definitely have increased call center questions as your customers are engaged with the program. So expect an increase in your call center. Outage management, being able to identify where things have gone wrong or not communicating. That's going to be a great benefit to focus resources and services to fix problems and potential problems. And your ability to have your retirement of and discontinuation of all your legacy devices. So again, market that right message. Enable your customers to manage and reduce their energy costs. People are engaged today. It is the new paradigm that more information, more transparency, access to their own data of usage. Years ago, I look at my electricity bill, yes, once a month, and yeah, okay, I pay the bill, and maybe I'm just old school, but I never really thought about it up until all the, just call it the green world that we try to live in, renewable energy, what is my carbon footprint? All that becomes now important to the consumer of today, which 30 years ago, I don't think existed. Focus on that consumer, get them to be okay with where the company needs to go and why. And that is going to make a better customer, that they're going to be engaged, they're going to be concerned about their electricity usage. How do they become less of a carbon footprint? What do they need to do to reduce their consumption? And that's, I think, is going to continue on for many, many, many decades. All right. This is where really we get into the meat of what has happened to some utilities over the course of the last 5 years. I actually interviewed probably about 12 or so production accounts that have gone through their AMI rollouts and started to assemble some of these lessons learned. So we're going to go through those now. And as we go through the next, just call it couple slides, there's going to be opportunity for questions. So please don't wait to the end unless you feel that's how you want to do it. But in the moment, please don't hesitate to ask your question. So there's going to be an ordering of these devices that's going to be like no other. I was working with a company that was rolling out prior to COVID 6,000 to 8,000 meters installations per day. That's a big undertaking. And now room in the meter shop, room in our third-party installers that they happen to be using, the ability to get stock levels sufficient enough so the meter shop can actually do their testing. They did sample qualification here. Some of you might not do sample validation, but in this case they did. So now you've got these meters coming in from the from the manufacturers. You need to have the room to store these meters. You need to have the testing done in a timely manner so they can get out to the storerooms so they can be there in time for the installers. This is a massive undertaking and logistical nightmare. And just to let you know, when this company went live, there was daily meetings just focusing in on the ordering, the receiving, the AQL, the shipping, and ready for installation. It was a nightmare if they did not take the time to every day review what's going to what storerooms, what's coming in from what manufacturers, and across the various form types of, hey, we need more 16S's, we need more 9S's, we need more 12S's. How does the meter shop then effectively move the inventory to those storerooms that need those devices? Forecasting and knowing your physical inventory becomes very important now. And, think about it. You've never had this amount of volume that you actually had to go through. What comes out of all this testing for AQL samples is going to be RMAs, your return manufacturer allowance. That kind of work, or that, just call it increase in work, really hadn't happened in the past because the amount of volume that's being bought to get AMI off the ground, decades went by before that has happened. So be aware that your RMA process needs to be very robust and efficient. Again, as you have meters that are standing in the rejected status, let's say you get a whole shipment in with the wrong firmware, wrong program, you're going to reject that entire shipment. Now that's going to be sitting in the docks waiting as more meters are coming in, shipping out other meters. And when you're involved in the AQL process, that shipment is under quarantine until you've passed the entire sample. So now you need room not only for your rejected, for what's now being tested, what now has been received. Don't let the inventory go by the wayside. It's going to focus on it. It's going to cause you problems if you don't address it earlier on. And we'll go through some more details in the RMA process further down. What most companies have seen recently is that meter accuracy in these new AMI meters, smart meters, is not really the problem. They're seeing problems in the functional testing of the device. Changes the game a little bit. Testing that remote connect switch. Being able to communicate with that NIC card. The number of firmware versions that are now required to track in your asset management system is an important attribute that you need to make sure you are carrying. Because there's multiple levels of the firmware, not only for the meter, for the NIC card, for the register. And I think there's a couple others out there that I'm forgetting right now, but just call it 4, 5, 6 versions of firmware that are now part of that meter. And that's where we've seen a lot of the problems, not in accuracy, but in functional testing. So your testing now is beyond accuracy. Make sure you build that time into, or know what that effort's going to be like as you start to order 10, 20, X thousands of meters. What's going to be your process time? How fast and quickly and efficiently can you get through a shipment of 10,000 meters doing an AQL sample Z1.4 for a 200 sample test? What does that look like? How long is that going to take? How many people do I need to have more than what I normally would have? And what goes on as regular activities in the meter shop? A lot of you guys are still doing VIT and, just call it PSC, PUC, regulatory reporting. That's still got to go on while all this rollout is going on. So be aware of the workload that's going to happen in the meter shop that could be detrimental to the overall operation of your company. When you look at all the IT that's involved now in AMI, it's not only asset management. You've got your work management systems, you got your head-end systems, you got your MDM systems. The siloed concept is gone, is truly gone. The sharing of information in real time across all those systems is something that every company needs to address. And not to say everything's got to be a web service call and immediate updating, but there has to be this constant communication, whether it's filed batch at night or real-time updates. There's going to be a lot of information passing throughout the portfolio, the enterprise. And who becomes then the system of record? Which systems becomes ownership of the data? Who is going to be the target systems that need to know about it? And who's going to be the source system that's always going to be updated when changes occur? So all the workflows that you go through when we talk about the life cycle of a meter, and as you go through that life cycle wheel, be aware of which systems have to know what changes and which system is going to be your system of record for your attributes of a meter, firmware, program ID, beyond the normal form, case of each, test amps, volts, the standard stuff for meters that always will be around. But now you've got all this extra information. When you do over-the-air updates, which system is going to receive that change? Program IDs change. Firmware versions change. This can be done all over the air, and you have to make sure that your systems of record, whichever ones they are going to be very tightly engaged and integrated. If you're going to use a third-party vendor to install your software, vet them thoroughly. They also have to have ample resources to handle what's going to be your deployment cadence. The logistics of getting those meters into those installation vendors or into your storerooms, making sure that the inventory is tightly controlled as to what was sent, who was receiving it, and then who consigned it. Make sure that you have a good feedback mechanism to know that complete flow has been executed and accurately captured. And then the last thing when it comes to preparing for your work ahead is, well, as we install, we're going to be taking out meters. And what are we going to do with those? What's going to be our disposal or recycle or refurbishment? And keep a couple meters on the side because you're always going to have opt-out customers that don't want AMI. So it's not like you're going to, get rid of all of them, but I would leave a handful on the side for those opt-out customers. But know what you're going to do, whether you're going to recycle, trash, refurbish, what's going to be that process. And when you're thinking about refurbishment, how are you going to track the existing original meter and its serial number? And after refurbishment, you don't want to lose that history. Now, it's more so probably for gas than electric, although I've heard of companies actually refurbishing electric meters with replacing NIC cards. I don't know how effective that's going to be, but I know companies are giving that a go. For gas meters, different story. You repaint them, you clean them up, and you can slap an AMI module on top of it, and now you got a refurbished gas meter. That's now an AMI enabled. Track the previous serial number to the new serial number. You don't want to lose the history. Questions so far? Anything that's sticking out that you would like me to talk about? Okay. So as we're going through the deployment, and we're actually now in production, some of the things that I talked about briefly, now let's go over in details here. Your whole rollout of your communication, the rollout communication needs to be set prior to the installation. You need to make sure that your communication network with all your relays and bridges and access points and range extenders, test out your communication network prior to installation. It's going to save you a ton of effort and a ton of pain. Be aware of where those AMI network devices are going to be placed. You might need more than one. The concrete jungles pose a whole different problem. Summertime with a lot of trees and a lot of leaves is going to be different. Your growth and vegetation is going to keep on growing, and where you place this device might not be okay in a year or two. So be aware, test out that network, make sure everything can communicate. When it comes to determining what system records the billing determinants and which processes the data, when you have complex installations with CTs and VTs or PTs, potential or voltage transformers, know what exactly is those determinants that are going to come up with the billing constant. Make sure that the ratios that you have for those CTs are accurate in what's actually installed. And as you're going through these deployments of changing out these meters, that would be a great time for you to record what exactly is the ratio of that CT. Is it a 200 to 5, 400 to 5? And a lot of companies have had issues with what was installed and operating for the last couple years had the wrong ratio. And as you're rolling out, now's the time to validate in whatever system that, yes, this is indeed a 200 to 5 or 400 to 5 or whatever. It's a dual ratio CT. Now's the time to capture that data, make sure it's 100% accurate, because after the installation and the rollout, you don't want to have to be cleaning up data. The time is now before you go out. Know what's in your system, know what's there. When you're going through these swap outs, make sure you can actually record what is happening in the field. And a lot of companies now are actually taking pictures of the meter before and the reads, making that historical record, and then replacing it with the new AMI meter with pictures as well. You might come across tampering, you might come across bad wiring, you might come across inaccurate data. your capturing of what was to what was expected and what was left is key to making sure you can stitch that story together. And your current systems will give you what was expected, what was found, and what was left. Make sure you cover those three bases. What I said before is be aware of those network characteristics, changes, seasonal and/or growth. It will become a problem. Have advanced analytics, if you will, on knowing where all your access points are, and that could be done with GPS, as the next one says. So this way you know where they are, and do your assessment of where you could have potential issues when it comes to vegetation growth. It will be a problem. As you're doing these exchanges, now's the time to validate, should your system have it, the GPS coordinates. There is no better time to do all your house cleaning when you're there after you install. That's the time to do it. You don't want to re-roll trucks out to go validate what was, because it wasn't captured properly and no one knows. Capture as much data as possible when you're doing your AMI rollout. There's going to be a whole new slew of assets out there. A lot of sensors, methane sensors, corrosion sensors, leak detectors, street lights, repeaters, thank you. There's going to be a whole slew of new devices, and there's one that actually just came out now by a company called ConnectDur, which is a smart collar that allows you to not to have to rewire the house if you have a solar panel that's generating electricity. There's a new device in New York State called a 550G for gas meters that is both a dual AMI and a AMR ERT mode. So it can communicate in both. How does your asset management handle that? Well, because you got your ERT register and its ID, and you've got your AMI NIC card and its ID, and you've got to store both these data because it could be installed as an ERT, and then a year later, it could be switched over to AMI. Some of the challenges that a lot of asset management systems have today is they can't hold this data. They have no place to put it. And if they're going to think about reworking a 20-plus-year-old system, that's going to have its challenges as well. So take a bigger view as to not only what you have to do today, but is your asset management system capable of growing and scaling with the industry that is constantly changing? There's new devices all over the place. One was actually kind of surprising for me, which is a I've got two PCs and they both are running. Is a gunshot detector on top of a street light. So it's going to expand. It's going to continue to grow. There's going to be new devices that you need to track. Be aware that it's constantly changing. I touched on the AMI firmware and program IDs. For firmware, like I said, there are several out there tracking different components within the meter, and a program ID that is all now, the program ID is affecting how it's going to be built. Accurate reporting on changes, whether they're over the air or done in the meter shop before they come out. Make sure that you have your processes nailed down and are tight and are communicated, and with the new system that it's trained. Training your people on how to use the new system, don't take that for granted. I recommend a run in parallel of your old systems and your new systems. And granted, depending on how big the organization is and how many customers you have, whether an extended parallel system is parallel testing is going to be needed, but some level of validation, what the old did, what's going to be the new, can I reconcile what should be different, and can I identify what shouldn't be different because it's the same. Don't take for granted the amount of time to validate the new system operating as if it was in production. Take the time to do parallel runs. And lastly, while you're out in the field, whether you're doing the exchange to do the meter or you're just performing tests in the field, make sure your current system can import those test results and store them properly. And be aware that your tests, whether it be done in the field or done in the meter shop, all those testing equipment has to be calibrated. And whether you do that monthly, weekly, yearly, but be aware that the increased testing, whether it's done from your samples, whether it's done for when you take out meters, some states require that you test a meter and store its results when you remove it from service. And I believe that's a New Jersey law. New York State doesn't have that law. So be aware of the various PSC regulations that might require for you to do something a little different or extra. Make sure you have the capability to track that. Questions so far? So is there anybody out there that has gone through their AMI deployment that they might want to comment on something I missed? I know it's a pretty lengthy list, and I did get input, like I said, for close to a dozen different utility companies. But is there anything else that you guys would like to talk about that was not discussed?
Just quickly, Paul, Jim McGill here up in Ontario. When we did our rollout at Hydro One here, we did photograph the off meters, but it's not a bad idea to stand back just far enough to get the brickwork or the siding or something else in the picture to show the customer later. Because every meter base is a little bit different and almost like a fingerprint, really. And the customer might look at a photo of a meter and say, well, that's great. You know, that's a meter. How do I know it was mine?
Good point.
If you got their brickwork in there, siding, whatever, you know, it's just another little piece of information that you can go on the defensive with later.
Good idea. Good idea. They can associate the picture to, yep, that's my house. That's me. Anybody else have some comments? Okay. So, like I talked about before, the logistics and the schedule of how you're going to get meters in, how you're going to test them. I mean, think about it. You can't release meters that are sitting in the warehouse until you've completed that HUL. Now, if you're doing 100% sampling, then as you're testing, those devices can go in stock. But if you're sampling Z1.4, Z1.9, double, single, reduced, you're going to have room tied up in your operations area waiting for that final device to be tested to give you the count that you can now release these into stock. And make sure that if you have an external service provider who's holding your meters, that they went drop shipped, that they're going to send you that. So 10,000 shipment went to your installation vendor. They're going to send you back a sample set of 200 meters randomly selected from that shipment. You must make sure that that installation vendor has the controls in place to keep those meters under quarantine until they get notification that the 200th meter was tested and successfully passed, and now the shipment can be released to stock. You can cause yourself some serious regulation compliance by putting out meters into service before the shipment was validated. Now, if you're not doing sample validation, fine. You're going with the manufacturer's test results, fine. Like I said, accuracy is probably not going to be your biggest issue. Communication, functional, working of the meters, most likely what I have seen happen in production for the last 4 or 5 years. Tightly integrated with your meter installation vendor is going to be key. It's going to save you problems, give you a little off work because you'll have extra room by giving it to a third party, but make sure those controls are in place. Otherwise, you're going to be introducing yourself to some extra pain. Rejected retirements and RMAs. This presents some new challenges. So let's say you get a shipment with bad firmware IDs. I requested this firmware ID and they sent another one. Or what actually could happen is that you're ordering meters in advance and 4.12 firmware version is the current one, and that's what you ordered. And a couple months down the road, 4.12 seems to have issues. Well, you still have that order out there that's being fed in periodically, or at, a couple thousand at a clip, and you've already noticed 4.12 is a problem. You don't want to receive any more meters with 4.12 because now the new one is 4.13. You need to have the controls built in places as you're processing the notice of shipment files or the meter manufacturing files, whichever you say, that you're going to stop that from being read in, because you don't want to process any meters that have the wrong firmware ID, but you ordered them several months ago. So your system has to have the built-in intelligence to stop that from being processed. On the flip side, you've got meters that you tested over the months. They're sitting on the shelves in the stock room or the storerooms, and now they're being installed a couple months down the road. Before you ship those meters, you better make sure that the firmware is correct. And your system needs to be smart enough to say, I'm not shipping these meters out anywhere because you've got the wrong firmware version. So be aware that, because think about what's happened, and it's already happened. Companies have already paid the price of double truck rolls because they weren't following and tracking the current firmware versions. Save yourself some pain. When you have rejected devices, you can get the same meter with the same NIC. You might get the same meter with a different NIC card. And if you've already processed that information and rejected the shipment, how does your asset management system handle that? Can it handle that? Big problems if it can't. Because now what do? You've got an asset that you can't record in the system because the serial number already exists. And if it exists, it has the wrong NIC card. Be aware that rejected shipments will happen, and it's going to happen more than you would like. And we're not talking RMAs, we're talking, hey, the whole shipment is just done. They gave us the wrong firmware ID, or it's the wrong program ID, or, whatever. But this is what has to be thought of in case it does happen. So reusing of serial numbers is something that you will come across. Make sure your system can handle it. When mechanical meters are coming back from the field, I've seen too many times that the meters are damaged because they're not being transported and secured properly. They're getting back to the meter shops and they're failing on not service. It was a good meter, but because it got shipped and it wasn't shipped properly, it got damaged. And now you actually have to explain to a potential issue that, oh, this meter was functioning properly, and now we're testing it in the field just before we retired, and now it's not. That's going to be a lot of work. The volumes are going to be higher for RMAs. The volumes are going to be higher for rejected shipments. It's going to take some extra throughput, some more controls. And when you get that RMA device back, how is that going to be processed? Is it going to come back on an MMF file? Are you going to do 100% sampling of that rejected devices or RMA devices? Understand your decisions, understand what decisions are actually going to mean, what's going to be the impact down the road.
Hey,
So,
Paul.
yes.
So, sorry to interrupt. We had on the same subject of RMAs. I actually had a question emailed in from one of
Shoot.
our callers who are listening
Cool.
in. You kind of answered this already, but could you just go over it again? Should we be tracking our RMAs in our asset management system, or can I have the meter manufacturer handle this?
You know, I guess it's the amount of trust and control and volume. You know, if you're dealing with a company that you have dealt for years and you have a good relationship, there might be, and volume, it's low volume, that might be acceptable. And again, where's your risk acceptance? Do I allow, you know, the fox to watch the hen house? Yeah, it's different for each company, different for each scenario. But doing a spot check, even though you allow the manufacturer to do its thing and trust them, I see no harm in doing a little spot check just in case. Just in case. And in the end, you know, you can then validate what your experience with your results, whether or not you want to tighten up that screw or not. But there's no determinant as to how you should go. I guess, you know, it's all risk based and how many devices you're rolling out. But just know this, I've come to experience that from the manufacturer, they were sending, just call it the AMI communication devices, from another utility company, sending it to a different utility company. And then as they were processing the MMF file, the file was failing. And when they started to look at the records and they're looking at the devices to say, this does not exist as one of your assets. It's not owned by your operating company. So you got to be careful. Now, the PO was good. The line item was good. The release was good. The configuration was good. Everything was good. But the manufacturer was sending you devices for a different utility. It happens. And it's still happening. So be aware. Trust but verify. If I can quote President Reagan. Yes, I'm old. Any other questions out there? I can't switch my screen to look at the chat. That's why I'm kind of stuck.
Let's see here. We had a couple guys who are offering to help anybody. So in the chat, I'll give a shout out to Matthew, Anthony, and it looks like Patrick are willing to share some experiences with people in the chat. They shared their email as well. And I had one other question here come in. How important is adding new AMI specific devices to our asset management system? We have both serialized and non-serialized items we are concerned about.
Okay. Non-serialized items to me is an issue right out of the gate. Because how do you know? How do you track? How can you verify if there is not a unique identifier to say that number is associated with that thing? There is no way to track it. So be aware that your your low value assets, I think, are okay for non-serialized. Be careful with that statement though, because you can still get burned. More value to the company and cost, those assets should be serialized. And when it comes to the place of record, again, when we talk about the system of record, there is no right or wrong way to say which system is the system of record. I fall back on that an asset management system of today, in today's 21st century, needs to be all-encompassing and knowing about the attributes and the lack of a word, but experiences that asset has touched through its life cycle. And whether or not we're talking about the underlying underglass AMI NIC card or attaching an AMI module on top of a gas meter with a volume corrector, all those assets need to be in one place. And when you then think about it from an installation standpoint, you've got your premise, you've got your panel, service delivery point, metering station, however you want to say it, and then what devices and communications are associated with that service that's belonging to that premise. So I think one single view, single pane of glass, that you can see all your assets in one spot, know exactly what they are, where they are, when they were, what PO did they come from, what sample batch did they actually get processed in, when were they stocked, who consigned them, who installed them. That's going to give you the full picture in one-stop shop. I would recommend one place for all your assets. Revenue aside, that's your CIS billing system, but at least have your asset management system to know if I've got a dial constant of 1 and I'm on a CT in complex installation and my ratio is a 200:5, then I want to see that billing constant of 40 in there. It's the billing system's job to actually validate what they're actually going to bill, but your asset management system should have all the data that supports what was being billed. And as things change and gets updated, program ID, time of use, going to demand, solar, whatever it is, that your asset management should be up to date, should be correct, and should be always the system of record. Hey, Tom, you've been around the industry for a long time. This I'm asking Tom Lawton for the guys don't know. Got anything to add here? Nope. Okay, I'll wait to the end. All right. So just to reiterate some of the things that I've talked about previously, you're going to find communication problems, and it could be the fact that the mesh is too weak. You don't have enough relays, extenders, bridges. Test out that new communication network prior. It's going to save you problems. When you have problem meters, like I said, it's not usually the accuracy. It's going to be the communication device. And when they get it back in the meter shop and they test it, and they test it on the meter manufacturing software, they're going to find out that it's a communication issue. It's not an accuracy. I already touched on firmware updates. Very important. Make sure that you can control what's being purchased, what's being then stocked, what's going to be shipped, and what's going to be installed. Those checkpoints and validations of what is the minimum purchasing, minimum shipping version of your firmware versions needs to happen. It's very expensive to re-roll trucks with no benefit except to fix a mistake, which should have never happened in the first place. I find a lot of companies out on the West Coast do a lot of things in the field. And I don't know whether maybe it's better weather than what's on the East Coast, but there's a lot of field testing, field manipulation, field work, as opposed to meter shop work that I see more common on the East Coast. So I guess depending upon where you are, how changes are implemented in production, be aware that you might be meter shop focused or you might be field focused, but either way, that you have the ability to capture what's going on, whether it be in the field, and the changes that happen in the field to any device needs to be captured properly in whatever repository system of record that you deem to be the place. And again, I'll say there's no right or wrong here. Companies operate very differently. have different ways to process their data, and not to say any one is better than the other. I look at it for where can I leverage my investment, lower the total cost of ownership by keeping all the assets that I have in one place. And whether they're serialized or not, be aware of the risks and gaps you have when it comes to non-serialized assets. So with good inventory control, you have that feedback mechanism where an installer should have already consigned the devices that they have for that work for that day. And then this way, as they are then consigned out of the meter shop or that third-party installer, and now being installed and completing that work ticket, that now you have that feedback mechanism to say, Sally checked out 10 meters and she consigned them and she installed 5, and 5 should still be in her inventory for the next day. And at the end of the week, when we run to say, so Sally checked out 10, installed 8, she has 2. Okay. Sally, please check back in those meters into the storeroom because someone else is going to need them. But what happens if the consigner is different than the installer? What happened there? If Sally checked it out, why did John be the person who installed it? I don't know, maybe they swapped meters out in the field. They were passing each other. Hey, I need a 9S. Mine just broke. I can't use it. Can I take that 9S meter? Yeah, sure you can. And that happens. But be aware that you need to track that because Sally consigned it. How come Sally didn't install it? Those feedback mechanisms has to be enabled. Catch your errors, catch your warnings, make sure that you're operating within the bounds of your company's risk level. So,
we have one other question, Paul, coming in
shoot.
on the chat here. It says, does AMI integrate with DAFRON billing system as well?
You know, I don't know. DAFRON, I would think that any AMI communicating device is going to be set up where their head-end system should be able to send whatever interval data to whatever CIS system, billing system, MDM. So I haven't heard of a scenario that the communicating meters could not be captured their interval data and processed. So I don't think it exists, and maybe it does, and I just don't know. But I haven't heard of any yet.
Okay.
So any of our TESCO people out there who have been in the industry for a lot longer than I have, any insights that you can share?
Morning.
While we have a couple minutes. Any more questions out there? Okay. So I thank you for your time. I appreciate if you would like to reach out to me and ask me any other questions, or those gentlemen, thank you very much for extending your availability to let people know your experiences. That's great. There's going to be many things out there that, of course, this short presentation didn't cover, but definitely go seek out your brothers and sisters in your utility companies. And I've found most utility companies are very open to sharing their experiences, their lessons learned. It was a easy task for me to actually consolidate this information and present it to you. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to Andy.
Can you hear me?
Yes, now we can hear you.
Okay, I had myself on mute. I'm actually typing in. If you guys need to reach out to us at all, we are also putting your information in the chat as well. And next week we will have harmonics coming up, and then we're going to take a break for Thanksgiving, give everybody a week off, and then throughout December, the last couple presentations of our session is going to be complete site testing, electric vehicle trends, and calibration of the commercial chargers. And then we're going to finish off with streetlights and 5G metering and testing. I know that's not everywhere yet, and it's more kind of oriented to the West Coast, but we're going to kind of get onto the cusp of that and explain what we're doing. It's really on the cutting edge of technology. It's really cool and really excited to share that with you guys. And then because of our popularity, because of you guys, we are looking to extend this into the spring and, you know, keep going with it. You guys are giving us great feedback. You seem to really, really like these. If you have any ideas for a session that you would like to see, or if you want to kind of, you know, maybe co-host something with us or give us, like, we're open to ideas. You can send that over to us as well. And I think that's it. So thank you again, guys. And if anyone out there, Veterans Day is tomorrow. We're going to send out a little email with our veterans here. We want to thank anyone who is a veteran who has served. We do appreciate that. And like I said, we'll send out our TESCO Rewind this week. You can always find it on our website. I threw that in the chat as well. And yeah, have a great day, guys. Thank you so much.
Thank you.